I'd like to start the Legislative Affairs meeting. If you would all rise and salute the flag with me, please. Thank you. Good Monday to everybody. Today is the Legislative Affairs Subcommittee. In attendance as far as committee members, we have to my left former Mayor and Council at Large Robert Haas, and to my distinct left Ward 6 Councilor Charles Patch, and myself. We do have a quorum. Additionally, in attendance is Ward 3 Councilor Arthur Granasso and Ward 1 Councilor Joanne McKenna. I'd like to also recognize former City Councilor William Bell, who's also in the audience in attendance. I'd like to take up, in no particular order, Councilor Haas, if you want to speak on your particular motion 16033, which is relative to storefront signage and advertisement, and apprise the public as to what you wish to get accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Ashley, when was this motion originally put in? Do you have that there? Okay, this goes back a couple months ago, this particular motion. All I wanted to do is request the administration to convene a meeting of the police department, the DPW, the Board of Health, and the health department to make sure they all, and the police department, to make sure they all understand what's going on as far as our city ordinances. There's many issues in the city, boats illegally parked in residential properties, large trucks are parking in the residential areas, and I just want to make sure that instead of a council getting on the phone and calling up the police department, that police department are aware of at 12 noon on Friday, unless the person has a permit, they should not be conducting business. Because you see a lot of people in Revere doing work commencing at 12 noon Friday, and like on the roof, they finish it Saturday. I just want to make sure we all know what the ordinance pertaining to building, and the same thing with health. So that's basically it.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak on this? Chair recognizes Arthur Granasso.
Albeit I'm not a member of the subcommittee, I do fully agree with Councilor Haas in reference to individuals who take it upon themselves to outwit, they think, the city when they start take out the nails and hammers and start doing major repairs to their properties come Friday afternoon. They know that the department closes at 12:15, to which all city services pretty much closes, with the exception of a handful of people who are on duty to do on-call performances. And the Revere Police Department, in this particular case, they have all the jurisdiction in the world to place a stop and cease and desist order on these individuals, or at least stop the work order, the performance of work in violation of not having a visible permit, which pretty much describes the activity that's being conducted by the homeowner. So we have the law in place, we have this, and we have these ordinances in place. Now all we need is the enforcement. And I think that if we keep on this measure consistently, I think that we will relieve our community of all this activity that occurs. So all the law-abiding citizens, it's unfair to the point that they have to go out, get a permit, pay the fee for the permit, do the letter of the law as it pertains to the ordinance, and yet they don't get satisfaction when they see individuals taking it upon themselves to do this. And it happens every Friday afternoon somewhere within our community. So I just think we should be mindful and watchful and vigilant and remind the Revere Police Department that their responsibility is to stop such performances occurring without a working permit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Granasso. I'd like to also recognize Councilor Zambuto, who's present. But to defer back to Councilor Haas, former Mayor Haas, just to reiterate, Bob, this motion that you put forward was in February of this year. So, next item on the agenda would be the Charter Review Committee, in which I thank Councilor Zambuto for forwarding on my behalf. Additionally, I'd like to recognize Council President Janino, who is in attendance as well. That said, folks, the reason for the Charter Committee, quite honest, is we haven't had a review of our charter for well over at least 15 years. And in fact, after speaking with City Solicitor Paul Capizzi on an issue relative to initiative petitions, in fact, there are many things that we can put within our charter to help safeguard us in many issues, and I think that's what we need to do. I think we need to take a collective look at it. I know that there are some people who, sitting in the audience, would like to have part of it change as a, basically, for people that are felons, that they can't run. Other people would also like to change the charter so that if someone were to do something while in office, very similar to what they have in Chelsea, that in fact they would be removed from office. And right now there is no component within our charter to allow that. Additionally, there are some people who want a recall petition, a recall component, and that's also part of it. Again, that's something that the community would have to look at. But that's pretty much what this is about. But I'd like to speak to other people if they had any ideas that they wanted to change within the actual charter. I don't know if the election commissioner, or the city clerk, or for that matter, even the city solicitor, as I put him on the spot, would think of anything that he would want to change after 15 years. Sure.
Hi, everyone. Paul Capizzi, City Solicitor. Our charter is Plan B, which is a state statute. We can't unilaterally change that without either a special act or going to the legislature to change it. Just want everybody to know procedurally. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm not aware of any.
Right, so if there was any changes that wanted to be made, we would have to vote them here and then submit them as special legislation.
Correct, correct. And then that would, if that were to succeed, it would pertain just to the city of Revere only, because right now the Plan B applies to any city or town that's adopted the Plan B in form of government under Mass General Law. I think it's Chapter 43.
Now, there is one question I do have, is would there be a provision that we could put within the charter? So, for example, I do not want to stop anybody's right to petition the city for whatever reason for initiative petition. But what I'm wondering is, can we put within the charter, so it reads, in the event that someone wishes to enact initiative petition, that you would time frame it so that if they did it after an election, they would have to take it to the following election if it fell within a time frame and so forth. Very similar to what we've changed in our charter regarding the at-large position. So if someone had basically within the last 6 months, the same thing with the mayor's position. Whereas if the mayor was to leave the last 6 months of the second year while his first term in office, that it would go to a special election and things of that nature. So my point is, could we fashion something so we don't fall into the same rabbit hole that we did recently with the slots?
It's a good question. I don't really know the answer. I think it would be difficult to do because although we're a Plan B, which is a certain number of sections in Chapter 43,
right,
the additional sections of Chapter 43, which apply to every city and town in the Commonwealth, dictate the way in which you collect signatures and the timeline in which you turn them in and give the council the opportunity to reject, and then when you shall hold an election. And there is a provision within those sections that say if it's close to an election day, a primary day, or a general day, you can have it on that day, provided the ballots hadn't already been produced. So there is it's complicated. It's not easy to just address what happened here so that it never happens again in the future.
And to be quite honest with you, that was the crux of this for me.
I understand. I understood that was where you were coming from with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would anybody like to speak on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and others. William Bell, 235 Revere Street, Revere. And I believe many others in the city of Revere that do live here, that do vote here, would like a recall provision in the future so that if the voters, a certain percentage, not just 200, 300, a certain legitimate quotient of voters, once someone recalled, they may have that recall election. Other cities and towns have it, and I think Revere, for a population of 55,000 people, 25,000 or more voters, should have some provision like that. And you people have a difficult job. You get elected every 2 years. The mayor's position is 4 years. I sincerely believe in the year 2016, October, there's a lot of buyer's remorse out there. I'm just going to leave that like that. And I think we, the people of Revere, should have some sort of mechanism to have a recall election. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Bell. Councilor Patch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I really don't understand now, after what the city solicitor said, we can't change that because we're Plan B on a recall, or would have to?
Actually, sure, I understand the question. What's the question?
The question is whether or not a recall can be put into the charter, recall provisions.
Recalling what? Who are we recalling? What are we
Whether it
recalling?
be a city councilor or a school committee member. So, for example, in the city of Chelsea, as you well know, you cannot run for office if you're a convicted felon. Moreover, if you are convicted of a felony, or for that matter, I believe high misdemeanor, you can be removed from office. Currently, there is no component or provisions within our city charter, and I think that's what's being alluded to.
That's right. So then Councilor Patch would be correct that if we were going to make an amendment to the charter, to the existing charter that we have, that would change any provision, we'd have to go through the special act. That's correct.
Paul, that is the only way. You can't do like a special election or anything to that effect.
Not to amend the current Chapter 43 language. No, that's a state statute. We don't have the authority here locally to make changes to that statute.
Okay, thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the only way that could happen is unless you did a binding initiative petition to change a charter, as they did regarding the 4-year term several years back when Tom Ambrosino was in office, where that was an initiative petition. And then you could do that. You could actually put in those provisions without even having to go to the council.
But once that petition passed locally,
It would have to go to legislation.
then it still had to go
Correct.
to legislation. So it wasn't that you, the folks, the politicians, were submitting anything up to the legislature. It was the voters in place of you then submitted it. You still had to go and get the legislative approval and the governor to sign it, I think, to make it a special act, I'm pretty sure.
Sounds
Oh,
right,
yeah.
although you're the attorney here, not me.
No,
so.
I know, and I wish I knew everything, but I don't. But otherwise, it would make no sense if you just had an initiative petition and then it would change, because it would still have to apply under the auspices of how the statute applies, whether by special act or to the Commonwealth as a whole.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody, Councilor Guanasso?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the leadway. I'm not a member, but I'd like to just explain my position. I think we have in place a recall order. It's called a re-election within 2 years. It's been my experience from reviewing politics over the past 60 years that what happens in a recall petition is that it takes some time in order to put this forward. And by the time we get the election for this to take place, we've already expended money, and we're already well past what the intention is. Well, what I think the former Councilor Bell has in mind is a good measure. I think we should come up with something other than the nature of a recall, is whether they're qualified or a qualification or some sort of order that prohibits anyone from running. Getting away from a recall. A recall means that we have to, number one, have the special legislation passed. We have to put on a petition to get this happening on a ballot, and then the voters decide whether a recall is in order. And that's a lengthy process, and an expensive process, I might add, and requires several hundreds of people to put forth this program, because you're going to have to secure signatures all over the place to gain such a thing. I don't think it's a simple 50 signatures to get a recall. So maybe we should look in the legislative affairs as to how we prevent anyone and come forward with your idea in reference to preventing anyone from seeking office.
Hold on.
Well, once someone's in office, I say, again, and we have an intention to remove them, we should also make it publicly known, and everybody gains in force with that. And the recall, in my opinion, is in 2 years, people vote you out, if there's such a nature of. If you're talking the mayor, it's 4 years, but, that's exceptional. I mean, people of a community vote a mayor in, unless it's a mayor has committed a fraud or some sort of derelict of response, it's just not a matter of disagreeing with what he says or she says. I think it's a matter of principle only, but in violation of a law, that's another thing. Then you could take those drastic steps. Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Guanasso, to be quite honest with you, putting this forward was to, many people within the community have made comments, and I think some of them don't understand the process in part. The other aspect of it, and you brought up part of it, quite honestly, a recall petition, which is done in other parts of the country and perhaps in the state, is relative to criminal acts during their time while in office. To seek a recall based upon dissatisfaction, you, in my opinion, hit it on the head that an election would be the best way to meter that out, and generally that's what's done in America. However, I do believe in putting forward provisions within the charter, such as quarrying elected officials, like they have to do for the school committee members and so forth, in Everett, and I believe in Revere. And if our employees have to go through it, why shouldn't we? Secondly, I honestly feel that, like in Chelsea, if you have, a criminal record greater than 10 years, then there should be something that should be within the system. But again, that's not just for George Rotondo to say, this is a democracy. This is where, these 11 members up here, to include myself, take a stand on that, and then obviously the populace vote accordingly if it goes that far. But this was just solely to present an issue that many of the people have made comment about as of late. That said, I do, if no one has any other questions, commentary, ideas regarding the charter change, I'd like to move forward with Council Order 16260, which is a motion relative to regulating drones. And the reason why I bring this up, and in fact it's an issue that I kind of was stunned to hear that actually there was a person putting, and I think you know the people actually, that were flying a drone into this person's property. And then I've done tons of research on this where people actually have micro drones where they fly them into windows, into bathrooms. I mean, giggling aside, I mean, this is, invasion of people's privacy. I know the FAA has restrictions and so forth, but at the end of the day, we have no mechanism to stop them. And down the beach where you have a flight pattern, which is just about 300 feet above sea level, those drones can fly that high. And who's to say some kid isn't going to play around I mean, you always hear about how a bird gets into an engine, blows out an engine. You know, granted, it's probably the equivalent of lightning, getting struck by lightning, but I think there's a purpose to regulate these here in the city of Revere, and not to burden the clerk, because I know she's underwhelmed as it is. I would say there's got to be a mechanism of registering these drones, or push this up to the state level and say, you know, to our legislator, listen, you need to do something to curtail this, whether it be putting like a registration number on the drone, so that way if the drone is found someplace where it shouldn't be, the police take it, they can walk it back to find out who has it, find them, and do what you want. I mean, but that, for me, that's the purpose of it. I did look at legislation that they had in LA County, as well as in Florida and other communities, and they felt strongly about it. But I'd like to do something among us that would, that we could pass up to, say, Representative DeLeo, Representative, thank you very much. I had a senior moment, no offense. But Representative Vincent or Senator Boncory, and let them forward that to the state legislature and governor and move forward with that, because I honestly feel there's a need for it. If anybody has any commentary, I'd appreciate it. Councilor Guanasso.
I think what you said, everything is correct. I think very positively that what's to stop or prevent a neighbor from putting his drone in the next yard over and seeing everything, viewing everything that the neighbor is conducting. There's got to be parameters placed upon drones, and in my opinion, it's full positive now that you see that so many incidents occurring with drones, and namely, the unfortunate part about it is most of the individuals who operate drones really don't know how to operate them, and safely. And so we're putting a lot of people in jeopardy here in terms of no regulations being really put in place, and the market is saturated with drones. I understand from my wife and the way she shops and everything, she says the hottest item this year is going to be drones for Christmas. And so given the fact that there's going to be an onslaught of these new drones traveling our whole community without any regulation, we're going to have a serious situation going on here. And people are going to be placed in jeopardy. So I don't know how fast we can react to this, but I think your idea about ordinances regulating them is a great one, because we got to do something. If the state in its wisdom and the federal government in its wisdom haven't put in these sanctions, we have to take it upon ourselves to protect our own residents. So I think it's a great idea, Council, and I think we should seek it out further.
Councilor Patch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also think it's a great idea. It's going to be, if it ain't already a problem in the city, but the main objective of getting the ordinance is maybe I recommend that the city solicitor could find out if there's I'm sure somebody, other city has already has done this, and something that we can use as a background to put ours together. We could get started on it. I mean, we're starting from scratch, so we don't have any really background. Would you be willing to do that, Paul?
For you, Charlie, anything.
You're the best.
I don't know anything about drones. I'm happy to look into it. I got to believe this is a nationwide sort of federal jurisdiction issue. Certainly the FAA is federal. If someone buys a drone in New Hampshire, moves to Revere, we wouldn't know about it. So I don't know whether we have the authority, the ability to track drones. And even if they're out there flying around and someone sees one, I don't know how you pursue it. And I'm not saying this to cast doubt on the possibility. It's just I really don't know much about how you keep track of them and what they do and how they do it.
I'm sorry, am I still on the? Yeah, I'm in the same category.
So
you
it's
are.
a new.
I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a new
where to
area
start
of
on
law.
this.
There's privacy issues, obviously. I could see why people be concerned about the safety issues, obviously, as well. But it's a new area. These are new products. Companies will be using them. The government themselves is using them. So there's a lot more to be learned about it. So it will take some time. Whether the city itself is ever going to be in a position to do any kind of sincere enforcement action or protection action with them, I don't know that we have the capabilities to do that, or the ability or the legal right to do that either, for that matter. So basically, I don't know much. I'm not telling you anything.
Well, that's, I think, Mr. Chairman, is a good place to start. We got to find out, first
Yeah,
of all, if we
yeah,
can do it.
and I think I've read some of the stuff in some of the municipal law periodicals going out there, that there are people raising this. I know the city of Boston had some interest in this. So things are starting to happen, but nothing has been solidified that can be applicable yet. And I really do think it's a much wider state, federal issue than it is the local issue for each city and town.
Through you, actually, Paul, I actually pulled off part of the legislation, or shall I say the ordinance, from LA, and it's pretty, well-written. I'll send that to you, and perhaps.
That would be great.
But I agree with you. I think this is, as I said earlier, it's going to have to go to a state or federal authority.
But you're involving the markets, you're involving all kinds of aspects that we have no jurisdiction or ability to control, so.
And at the very least, if we can put a fine on it, and, some kid starts goofing off, give them,
I see what you're saying.
community service or whatever.
Yeah, if you'd please forward that to me, I'd be
Thank you.
welcome to read that.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
You can speak as long as you wish, Councilor
I'm normally
Powers.
very brief. I myself don't know if there's any appetite in the state legislature, if there's any legislation pending similar to what you might find in Los Angeles County. But I would suggest that perhaps we have a joint meeting with our legislative delegation in the city council and discuss whatever might be out there. Maybe they would have more information on this than we would. As legislators, they know what bills are coming up and where they are in committee, et cetera, and move on from there. And if there is an appetite for that, perhaps we could look at what is pending and maybe put our input into it with regard to how close they can fly to properties, et cetera, and move on from there, because I think it's definitely I know I wouldn't want anyone looking at my bedroom window, and
I won't go there.
well, no, I'm very serious, and I don't think anyone else would. I don't think it's a laughing matter. I think it's a serious matter and something that we have to look into, and perhaps we should send a communication to a delegation, a state delegation, finding out when they're available, and set up a meeting with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Zambuto, and after you, I will answer Councilor Powers' comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support your motion. To the extent that I want to explore more where other communities and where the state and federal government are going with this, and so we can adopt a responsible policy against this. But I do support your idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zambuto. Actually, at this point, having researched a little bit online from the Massachusetts bill search, I don't know if there's any current legislation up there other than Senate Bill 1664, which was by Robert Hedlund, and it more addresses the ability to utilize drones for commerce. But I totally agree with you, Councilor Powers. I totally agree with you, Councilor Patch, as well, regarding your comments. We do need to bring this to the Senate, for that matter, the state legislature, and have something at that level. But currently, there is nothing at the state level. I do know that there's been incidents where the FAA is now requiring people to, I believe it was either Councilor Haas or Councilor Granassa's comments about the ability to fly them. They're now regulating it to a point that they have to actually get certified. So with that said, I think we'll keep this in committee. I'll send off a letter to the appropriate people at the state legislature, and we'll go from there if anybody has any comments. And City Solicitor Capizzi, I'll send you off that piece of legislation, that there, and perhaps if you can fetter through it in your infinite time, I'll send that up to the state legislature so that they have something to kind of wrap themselves around as well. With that said, this will end the Legislative Affairs Committee. I thank you all for your attendance and your time. Thank you.